What coin buys a king's courage, and what ruin is richer than a man? In the market's breath, where bargains beep like winter flies and the paving stones remember 100 feet of fate, they sold him for the weight of a coin no man would lift but with a dirty thumb. A horse stood like a dark complaint beneath the auctioneer's gavel, ribs like a carved harp, eyes like coal still warm from a hearth that has lost its house. What name did they whisper as they sent him to the highest hand who had no manner to love? 70 pence, cried one. A pound and no feed, mocked another. Penny by penny, they traded dignity for the clink of small comforts. Yet mark this. The horse bore a scar that ran like a comet's tail down his shoulder, and a thin rope crusted at the mouth, not from bridle but from some grief. He lowered his head as if the sky itself were a weight upon him, and in that pose there spoke an old patience that could make sorrow a sermon. Beside him stood a lone figure, hands browned by toil, coat patched at elbow, hair like straw in the sun, who did not jostle for coin or quarrel for price. He did something rarer than purchase. He listened. But listened to what? To the silence that answered the horse, to the click of a buckle in a crowd that applauded cruelty, to the small sound of a red ribbon snapped and left upon the auction plank. What secret lay under that ribbon? Who once tied it there and why? The market cheered the sale and did not ask. Yet one man asked everything with an unbelieving look, and that question would not survive unchallenged. Who would have thought that the coin that bought a beast would pay but a breath before a reckoning? And so the tale begins with a small, impossible thing, a frayed ribbon, a rusted tag, and a bargain struck beneath a sun that did not know it set on a new story. What did the ribbon mean, and who would answer when the horse finally spoke in action? Rowan had the gait of a man who measures his life in steps taken to mend things. He was neither noble nor a braggart of trade. His palms were split maps of old work, his fingers the shape of knots and stitches. He kept his house where the lane narrowed and the town's wheel dust settled like prayer upon his doorstep. The smith called him a soft-handed fool, and the tavern called him a prudent one, but Rowan kept to a quieter craft. He tended what others cast off. Worn harnesses, broken bridles, a name, a stray horse. He gathered such things as a bee gathers which flowers will not wither. He called his world small and steady, a shed, a well, a cat that trusted only him, and a morning that always tasted of coal and bread. Under that familiar ordinary, something had been hollowed. Each night Rowan returned to the empty bed where a presence had once left a laugh like a bell. He cleaned the spoons and folded the blanket as if folding the absence into a tidy, bearable parcel. He did not speak of why he slept thinly, or why his fingers trembled when they remembered a kick of youth he could not name. His sorrow was an unlit lantern he carried at the edge of town, visible only in the way he washed a cup twice and looked longer at footprints left in rain. He moved with a careful economy of hope, small risk, measured touch. Yet in the market that day something broke that counting, and Rowan's caution would meet a horse whose silence had its own currency. The town's auction yard was bordered by low-slung buildings, and the air tasted of old hay and copper. Men lined the boards with laughter like dice. They bought hogs and timber and sometimes the kind of pity that mortgaged a conscience for bread. When the horse came, he came wrapped in rumor, a fallen charger from a lord's stable, a plow beast beaten for speed, a mare's colt abandoned on the moor. No one knew the truth, and everyone had an opinion. The horse's hooves had scraped a path to nothing. The auction tag, long crumbled, hung like a memory, yet the crowd saw only a discount. Rowan had been at the market for other reasons, to bring a stitch of leather for a neighbor, to sell a table he repaired. But when he saw the horse, something in him folded and unfolded like a page remembered. He did not think in heroics. He thought of feed, barley, an old bale in the corner of his yard, water from a clean well. He thought of shelter, a stall with a roof that would not drip on the horse's worn back. He thought of a red ribbon found and tied to a bridle by some hand that might have loved the animal. Such small things, unnoticed by men who buy or sell, mattered to Rowan. He bought little that day, saved little, but he had coins enough for bread and the stubbornness to spend them on a life that had been sold cheap. There was a face in the crowd, the auctioneer, leathery and quick, who clipped the coin with a voice like a hinge, and a man in a glossy hat, eyes like coin, who watched Rowan with a smirk that read like a ledger. The town keeps its debts. A whisper reached Rowan's ear that the horse had been used to draw men from a manor in a night of smoke and rumor. The rumor said the beast had been part of a carriage that did not return. Rowan did not know mansions from plows, but he knew the language of loss. It looked like the beast's brazen flank scarred as if by a brand of grief. Something in Rowan's chest, the part of him that kept spare hope in a tin box, opened to the horse as if to say, "If I cannot mend me, I can at least mend you." He did not speak of sorrow. He acted. He paid the little price and led the animal away with hands that trembled not from the crowd, but from the smallness of the coin. The horse yielded a slow, patient breath, as if the measure of a man's mercy could be counted in small coins that the town would laugh at. Rowan told no one that he heard the animal's nostrils flare at the scent of home, or that the horse's ears flicked as if to catch a voice only it could remember. He carried with him a frayed ribbon still wound through a tangle of mane, and a rusted tag that bore a number whose meaning no one present could now afford to know. In that exchange, something unnameable shifted, a bargain sealed not by price but by the look they gave each other, a handshake without a clasp. Rowan brought the horse into his yard beneath a sky thin with winter's first breath. He offered water and a crust of bread, which the horse accepted with a delicacy that made Rowan's hand ache. When the animal drank, its ribs trembled like a string instrument finally struck, and the sound, small human, stirred something like hope in Rowan. Yet the horse kept its head low, and its eyes were an old harbor in which Rowan saw both refuge and storm. He put out a rough rug and a bucket of oats, and in the dim light of his shed it felt as though two strangers had taken shelter under the same roof, each nursing a wound with the silence of patient patience. Rowan did not name his grief, and the horse did not raise its voice. Both traded in small mercies and watched the night for reasons to fear. They said the horse would not take a saddle. They said he feared the trace of leather where men had tugged at him. Rowan did not push. He believed in subtlety, a soft hand at the shoulder, an unhurried brush of the flank, the balm of company before command. He began each morning with a whisper of oats and a whisper into the animal's ear, words without demand, small truths about water and warmth. The horse would turn his ears, delicate as leaves, and sometimes, when the wind lay just so, he would breathe as if remembering fields where grass had been softer. The first week passed like a prayer said in drips, a careful brush, a cautious step, an almost trust that slid like a coin from one palm to another. Yet trust is not a coin to be spent. It is a ledger of days. The horse's mistrust came in small acts, a sudden flaring of nostrils at the sound of a cart, a refusal to cross a shadowed lane, a tense shift that let Rowan know some memory lay beneath the skin. Sometimes the beast would rear slightly at the clack of children's play, and always, he flinched at fire. The least spark in Rowan's hearth made his whole frame shiver as if thunder had split the air. Rowan learned the catalogue of this creature's fear: ropes, lantern light, the creak of an oaken door. Each night, after the town's laughter died, the horse would stand like a sentinel and listen to a silence that no man had earned the right to name. A rival appeared in form and in temper: Tobias Hale, landlord of the tavern and buyer of broken promises. He had an eye for bargains and an appetite to possess things. He had once lost a mare that ran with a lord's runner, and had since hounded any chestnut that sniffed at fortune. He swallowed debts as other men swallowed wine, and never left a draft unfinished. When he saw that Rowan had bought the animal for a paltry sum, he smiled in a way that split his face like a ledger line, one who would collect a debt. He began to frequent Rowan's lane with the excuse of grain to sell, but his visits bore the weight of possession. He spoke often of utility: a horse that could plow, haul the tavern's kegs, pull a cart for hire. He offered coin that glittered and promises that smelled of ale. Rowan declined with a politeness that feared nothing so much as the clink of hollow gold. The town itself added pressure. Word travels faster than bread in these lanes, and soon gossip braided the everyday silence. Children asked Rowan whether the beast would become a workhorse. Women shook their heads and spoke of hunger in winter. The smith muttered of harness costs. The horse, unbothered by opinion, stamped his foot and snorted at the idea of being yoked to the usual, because he remembered something more than plowing or keg hauling, a set of hooves that had once known the cadence of a rider's command on a field not meant for beasts. Rowan watched him and felt the familiar arc of his own past. There had been a time when a man could claim a cause and ride it to shore, but thereafter he had learned to measure his impulses in bread. Now, with this animal, Courage and caution braided together until Rowan could not tell which strand led. An inciting storm came not from the heavens, but from a whisper carried on a tavern's breath. There were men looking for a horse lost a season past, for a steed that had borne a carriage with a crest. The rumor carried a name of a vanished master, Lord Ashbourne, a man whose house had smoldered with secrets, and the crest sang in the ears of men with memory for profit. Rowan felt this rumor like a pebble in his shoe, irritating then painful. He kept an eye on the horse's neck and found beneath mane a brass medallion half swallowed by hair, its face scratched, but holding the mark of a house, 3 stars and a broken crown. Rowan paled, for he had read such marks in the margins of stories children tell at hearthside. He passed his thumb over the metal, feeling the dent of history, and the horse shied as if the touch had called back a name. Why had such a token been lost? For whom did the horse keep such memory? Rowan's answer was silence, but his silence began to weigh like an oath. The first cliffhanger came as dusk wrapped the lane. A stranger's boot echoed on the path, slow and deliberate. Rowan looked up from the medallion and saw in the doorway smear of light the glossy hat of Tobias Hale, and behind him, shadows like wolves. Tobias's grin was the kind that files a name into a ledger, and he carried with him a note of claim, a piece of paper smudged with an old seal that suggested ownership or interest. A pity for a good beast wasted on a fool, he said, and the word pity held a threat. Rowan felt the old calculations tremble. The coin that had bought the horse was suddenly thin against the weight of other men's memory. Tobias made his interest clear without raising his hand. He belongs with use, he said. Rowan did not answer. Instead, he tucked the medallion beneath his shirt like a lit coal, and went about the small work that makes one look unafraid. But the night carried the echo of a promise Rowan had not yet made. Keep. Or give days became a ledger of tests. The horse accepted oats from Rowan but would not let Tobias near. He followed Rowan when the road was lined with dusk, yet balked at crossing a certain culvert where water had once swallowed wheels. Rowan began to notice patterns. At the touch of a certain whistle, a small tune he half remembered from childhood, the horse would raise his head and stamp in a way that spoke of training, not of wildness. In the stable, Rowan tried to find where he might place a bridle that would not bruise old wounds. He warmed the leather in coals and eased it over the horse's ears with a prayer on his lips. The beast tolerated the touch but refused the saddle. Not yet, his eyes seemed to say. Rowan learned patience anew, and in that apprenticeship he felt the ghost of his own restraint soften. Another obstacle arrived with rain. A magistrate's man arrived to ask questions. He sported a uniform bit too proud for the lane and a memory long for paper. Someone, it would not be hard to guess who, had whispered that the horse might be connected to the Ashbourne carriage. The magistrate's mouth was narrow as a coin slot, and he asked where Rowan had acquired the beast. Rowan answered with the truth. Small coin at auction, a mercy purchased. The man nodded as if filing a receipt in a book that measured justice in convenience. We must record it, he said, and Rowan suspected all records were invitations for men with keys. The possibility of seizure trembled in the air like a moth drawn to flame. At roughly the third interval of rising pressure, another cliffhanger cut the soft thread of routine. In the hush before dawn, the horse whinnied, a long, low sound that shook the rafters, and without warning, turned and struck the stable door with his shoulder. The wood splintered, and within the crack Rowan found a letter tucked as if placed by a careful hand, under the stall's beam. The paper bore a smear of soot and a hurried hand. If the beast lives, return him to the crest. He is bound to the road, he must not. A. Rowan's fingers closed on the words and felt them burn. Who had written such a plea? What authority did A hold? The horse stamped and pawed the dirt as if urging Rowan to read, but the letter's voice was a chain. It asked for returning what men thought belonged to themselves. Rowan's chest tightened. The choice that lay before him was no longer about shelter and oats, but about secrets that had teeth. Rumors, claims, seals, the town's small theater of greed, turned toward the horse with an appetite. Yet every attempt to press the animal, to harness him to a cart, to lead him into service, to sell him on again, met with a refusal so absolute it felt like law. Rowan tried gentleness, he tried firmness. The horse answered neither as a beast of burden nor as a broken thing. he answered as if some other charge lived beneath his skin, as if he had been kept for a mission that required more than muscles and feed. Rowan, whose life had been measured by small repairs, found himself standing at the map's edge where a path sloped into unknown. He felt the old ache rise. Does one keep what is found or return what is bound? The medallion under his shirt grew heavier with each passing hour, and then, the turning point that would unfix the future, came not in argument, but in a night of flame. A barn on the far side of the town caught where children left a lantern veiled. Smoke curled like a specter and men ran with buckets and cursing. In that commotion a scream rose from the lane, cries of a child trapped beneath fallen beams. Rowan, who had measured his life in small risk, felt something larger than accounting enter him. He ran toward the sound, and as he ran, a figure with a glossy hat, Tobias Hale, tried to bar his way, saying coldly, "This is folly, man." Rowan went past him, through smoke that stung the eyes and clogged the breath, and there, in the heart of the ruin, he found a child white with dust and a cartwheel pinned above. The horse stood at the threshold of Rowan's yard as if feeling the heat, and then he did a thing no one expected. He plunged forward past the crowd that feared flame. His nostrils flared, his muscles coiled like rope, and he drove himself into the burning barn with a courage that struck Rowan dumb. Men cried out and many beat at the air with buckets. The horse's coat smoldered where the heat kissed it, but he pushed through the wreckage as though the thing inside him was not fear but a map. Rowan followed, hands raw and heart adrum. Together they navigated the beams. At a moment when the light and the smoke blurred, the horse reared, and with a shove the pinned wheel rolled away, shedding its burden. Rowan jerked the child free, and in that breath the horse turned his head and met Rowan's eyes with such clarity that Rowan understood. Not a trick of the mind, but a recognition. The barn's last beam splintered as men pulled child and man from the smoke. Water hissed on embers. Tobias stood at the edge, face pale and small beside the glow, and the townspeople looked on in a stunned hush. No ledger could measure what had poured from a horse's ribs that night. Rowan, soot-streaked and trembling, felt the world shift. The coin that had bought a life now bought a breath for another. A hush fell heavy as the town watched the animal who had been bought for pennies become the thing that rescued what coin could not, a child's life. But what did that rescue mean? Had the medallion's crest guided his hoof, or had some other stubbornness lived in him? Rowan, fingers still clotted with dust, held the brass in his hand. It had heated slightly from the work. The horse lowered his head without complaint and breathed a long breath as if weary from bearing more than muscle. And so part one closes on a single jagged note. The town would not soon forget the image of that animal, bought for pennies leading into flame, and neither would those whose hands had touched smoke and soot. Tobias's lips had found no measure of laughter now. The magistrate's book lay open on a cart like a door ajar. The letter signed A had been read and burned by children who thought it a game. Rowan stood amid the husk and felt the medallion's weight in his palm. He had saved a child. He had not yet saved himself. Outside at the edge of the yard, hoofprints disappeared into the night like a promise. And from the alleyway a shadow detached itself and moved toward Rowan with the slow certainty of night itself. A figure carrying a seal that matched the medallion. "You have something that does not belong to common sight," the voice said. "Return it, or the road will take you where the coin cannot follow." What will Rowan answer? The man in the alley spoke like a bell that tolls for a country. Slow, full of intent, each syllable a hammer. "I am Ammias of Ashbourne," he said, and the name fell like a coin on cold stone. He bore the family seal at his throat, 3 stars and a broken crown, and his eyes were the kind that read accounts by memory. "That token you hold is the Ashbourne medallion. Return it." He did not ask as a beggar asks. He demanded as one who keeps a ledger of debts long unpaid. Rowan's hand did not loosen from the brass. He had slept on decisions and waked with them heavy upon his ribs, and now an old compassion braided with new defiance. "It was bought with my coin," he answered, voice small and steady. "Sold at market. The beast would have died. I cannot return what is a breath's price to men who sell and forget." His words were truth edged with tenderness, and they struck the alley's silence like a blade. Ammias's mouth trembled as if the name sold were an ache he had tried to put away. "You saved a life last night," Ammias said, and there it was, the lead that would draw the net. A child bearing the crest. Word came to us in smoke. A lad was found in the wreckage. "It is our blood." The medallion marks him. The horse bears him to safety because it remembers the house and its master's blood. Rowan felt the world tilt. Question and answer braided into a rope he could not yet unloose. The child, the one pulled free from the burning barn, had lain white with soot at his feet as the townsmen coughed and spat. The child's hand had clutched nothing but the space where a medallion might have been. Rowan had not known the boy's name. He had not seen the crest anew. He did know in that minute the horse's look in the smoke, not panic but purpose. The animal had driven through flame as one who remembers a road and will not be turned. Ammias pressed a letter into Rowan's palm. Heavy paper, the ink browned by time. It bore the hand of a woman whose name had been whispered earlier as Aurelia Ashbourne, once housekeeper, keeper of keys. If found, seek the medallion, the letter read. Return it only to the house of Ashbourne. It is bound to the boy as proof of blood and claim. Rowan's fingers closed as if the paper were a bird. Why had the house's keeper sent a plea into the dark and not come herself? Why had the medallion been left under a ribbon at a market? Questions rose like storm clouds, sharp and menacing. Rowan lifted his head and found, in the distance, Tobias Hale's silhouette, watching like a creditor who scents a profit. Tobias's interference had the soft beginning of a snake, a smile offered as news, then a grasp for more. He stepped from the doorway of the tavern as if from a stage, his voice oily, his offer quickened with greed. Ashbourne's steward tells a tale, he said, lips curling. Treasure and title follow such tokens. You are a man of little means. Sell and be shrewd. Return the beast, return the medallion, and take coin. That is the town's counsel. He named coin as if it could sweeten conscience. Rowan considered the child tucked beneath the blanket at his hearth. The child whose breath had once been so small, Rowan feared to count it. If the boy were of Ashbourne blood, then a greater justice lay upon Rowan's shoulders. Would he give the child to a house of old claims, where names decide fate? Or would he keep the boy in the place where breath had been rescued by this very horse? The medallion's face burned like an accusation in his palm. The town gathered like a tide, curious and hungry for a verdict. Men with lanterns spoke as if the moral measure of a thing could be read by candlelight. Ammias claimed duty. Tobias claimed profit. The magistrate's hand hovered like a shadow waiting to sign. The child, who slept and stirred in Rowan's cottage, had dreams from which he did not wake. His fingers curled like roots around the empty air where a name might have been. Rowan watched the boy, and as men in the market once judged a beast by its rations, he felt the verdict forming in his bones. When the choice demanded flesh, it demanded action too. Ammias proposed a return to Ashbourne Hall, a test of token and truth. Let the medallion unlock what must be shown, he said. If the boy be of Ashbourne, the house will take him. If not, then the town will judge. Rowan hesitated. He had no desire to trade a child like a measure of grain. Yet the law and honor of names held deep roots. The horse, patient, flanked by taut muscles, stamped once and lifted its head as if to say that the road could be known. The journey to Ashbourne Hall was a slow unspooling of memory. Fields lay like folded cloth. The river hummed. The wind carried the sharp cold of a season that felt older than men. The horse walked with a carriage of dignity that made children point and grown men hush. It kept its ears pricked toward the ruins where once a house had smoldered. Rowan's hand lay upon its shoulder with a tenderness that was more prayer than ownership. He had become, in the span of a few days, guardian of a life and steward of a truth. At the gate of Ashbourne, the land told its history in the hush of wild grass and the char of old timbers. The house, a skeleton of a once-breasted mansion, lay open to sky like a chest whose lid had been beaten back. Ashbourne's crest, scorched and yet recognizable, clung to a lintel like a half-remembered poem. Ammias's voice grew thin before the ruins. We will find the lock to suit the medallion, he said. Rowan felt a tightening at his throat. Part of him feared the house not as structure, but as a place of judgment where names weighed more than love. Inside the main hall and where soot still wrote, scars upon the beams whence stood a chest beneath a collapsed portrait. Rowan placed the medallion into the hollow where metal matched picture, and the brass clicked with the small miraculous sound of a bolt opening. Tobias's eyes widened as gold spilled a breath of light. The chest held a folded parchment, a locket, and a sealed vellum stamped with the Ashbourne mark. Ammias reached in and pulled a folded paper where a name trembled in ink. This is the will, he breathed. It names the Lord's Son, a child secreted away in the confusion. The medallion marks him as blood. If that boy lives, he is rightful heir. The paper fell into Rowan's hands as if a verdict had been placed upon his palm. He unfolded it and read, not only the name but a request that the child be raised in the care of kind hands should tragedy come. The will did something the town had not expected. It did not demand the child's return to Golden Gate, but asked for him to be kept safe until able to decide for himself. If he be found, the will's hand said, let him be taught to choose. Rowan's throat tightened as if the very ink had been made of choice. Tobias's face, once bright with hunger, darkened into fury. He strode forward, for gold makes a man bold in ways law should not allow. A will is only paper, he spat, and he made a move to seize the boy's name for profit. The town murmured. Amia stepped between, hand trembling with duty. Rowan put his palm against the horse's flank and felt the steady heat. The animal, whose training had once steered it through carriage and law, now lifted its head and planted itself between Tobias and the chest as a living bulwark. It was no theater-struck thing. It was instinct sharpened by memory. The horse reared, a swirl of flaring nostrils and hooves that struck the earth like the answer to a clarion. The moment held. Tobias lunged, and the horse responded with the blunt truth of a beast defending a charge. A hoof found purchase in the soft ground, and, with the animal's weight and will, Tobias was thrown back upon himself. He skidded in dust, breath gone from his throat like a man who had been told the wrong measure of life. No bone broke, but pride did. The town exhaled as if a held breath had been released. Ammius, who had carried ancient duty as armor, fell to his knees and with shaking hands cradled the locket that had been folded in the chest. Inside lay a painted face of a boy, small, solemn, and behind it a note in Aurelia's careful hand. He was hidden to save him from men's wars. Only trust those who love, not those who count. The words cut like a river path, honest and narrow. Rowan thought of the child in his hearth, whose sleep had been a thing of soot and light. He thought of the medallion warm in his palm and of the horse whose courage had been a map not yet read. The climax resolved like sunrise through storm clouds. Tobias was bound by public shame in a magistrate's hand, unwilling to pay for a greed that had been shown simple and wrong. Ammius, seeing the will's true temper, bowed his face and asked for something he had not asked before. Not the child's right, but the truth of the boy's heart. Let him choose, he said, voice small as a bell. If the house is right, I will be steward to his wishes. If the boy wants hearth over hall, let it be known. The town held its silence as if listening for a god to confirm. Rowan held no title. He had only stitched harnesses and mended things. Yet when the boy, stirring from sleep now aware of faces and heat, opened his eyes and looked from Rowan to the man on his knees, he laughed low and unafraid and reached for Rowan's calloused hand. The child's choice was not spoken in law, but in the tender act of a small palm finding a larger. The horse, hearing that human accord, lowered its head and placed it upon Rowan's shoulder as if to say what men could not put into contracts. Some bonds ask no coin, only fidelity. With the long, slow uncoiling of the town's breath, affairs settled like silt into riverbeds. Tobias was taken to the magistrate, where he found his appetite for profiteering checked by a ledger of shame and a town's eye. Ammius returned to Ashbourne's threshold to arrange for the boy's ancestry to be pleaded, not as a taking but as a partnership. The house would provide schooling and name. Rowan would remain a godfather of sorts, allowed to teach the child the small craft of mending and tenderness. Aurelia's note found in the locket spoke of reasons deep and hard. The house had been threatened, the child hidden so the bloodline might breathe another day. It was a truth wrapped in sorrow and protective cunning. The boy, whom the town began to call simply Ash or Ashton in murmured affection, spent days in a new kind of lesson. He learned to read a book and to mend a torn cloth. He learned that titles make a shape with which a heart must contend. He came to the forge to listen at Rowan's elbow where the man shaped leather and patience with equal care. There, among straps and tongues of leather, he learned the honest virtue of repairs, that things break and may be made whole again by careful hands. Ash watched the horse with a tenderness that needed no heraldry. The animal answered with a patient nudge and sometimes a follow of the little boy, as if remembering a path from a younger age. Rowan declined reward in coin. Amyas proffered a purse and a small cottage's rent with the steward's insistence, but Rowan's answer was of simpler grain. "I will not take coin for what I would have given a shred of sleep to save," he said. "If the house will see the boy taught aright and will keep an open door for folk of this town, then keep what gold you will. I keep this horse in the trust he wears." Amyas's eyes glimmered, and in them was the ache of a man learning that duty may change shape when the living ask for mercy. The horse, whom Rowan now called Banner for the token that once hung in his mane like a small flag, settled into an uneasy peace. He kept his scar like a line of scripture and allowed a saddle now and then, though never for labor heavy as before. Children came to feed him sugar and whisper small promises into his ear. He listened with that patience only animals can grant and gave back, sometimes, a soft nick of his muzzle that felt like benediction. His instincts never left him. If flame was near, he still flinched. But then he would stand again and answer the call his memory made. Men ceased to look upon him as bargain and began to see in his steady shadow the measure of a life redeemed. The town's rhythm resumed, but with new notes. Old prejudices for a time were cued into a different dance. There was shame for those who had cheapened living things. There was praise for the one who had paid with bread and found a kingdom of consequence. Still, not all healed quickly. There were whispers. Why had Rowan not kept the boy hidden? Why had Aurelia sent the letter instead of writing herself? Amyas answered in the sober manner of a steward. She feared men's hearts were hungry enough to eat what love had left. She trusted coin less than character. His words did not satisfy every skeptic, but the town leaned toward the ease of seeing a child given choices over being handed like a package. Rowan and Ash spent evenings where light lay like a slant of silver. They walked to the river, sat on stones warmed by the day, and listened to the horse chew hay with the slow gravity of one who keeps counsel with seasons. Ash would ask about the scar upon Banner's flank, and Rowan would answer with a story shaped by neither boasting nor falsehood. "He remembers something," he said, watching the animal's ears twitch. "He once carried a man from fire. He carried a boy to safety. Now he carries us to patience." The boy's eyes brightened as if learning a new alphabet. Rowan felt the old wound in his chest ease, not vanish but change. It no longer ached alone. Amyas visited often. He brought books bound in rough leather and a promise to teach the child names of the world beyond their town. He also brought over time the softness of contrition. He had seen how a horse's courage could rewrite a man. Tobias, when released to the town's penance and not to ruin, took to working the roads he had once sought to profit from, his appetite for quick gain curbed by the very fear that had been shown to him physically. The magistrate, who had once kept accounts as a permanent creed, softened in the face of a will that had asked for mercy. The day of choosing came not as trumpet, but as a soft decision made by a small hand. Ash, now with more steady breaths and cheeks clearing from smoke, stood by Rowan in the stable where the morning smelled of oats and old cloth. "I do not want to go away," he said, voice small and sure. "I want to learn and come when I please. I want to keep my friends and learn the house's names." His words were the payoff of Aurelia's plea and the will's wisdom. Once a child is found, his wishes must be held more dearly than any crest. Amyas bowed to that decision and to Rowan's silent guardianship. He found in his duties a different measure of service, to honor the boy's choice, and to make the house a place where townsfolk might find work and care, not only title. Ash was taught both letters and leather, and the house offered patronage that mended Market's cold bargains into opportunities for townfolk. Aurelia's handwriting, and preserved in the locket, became a lesson in how love can plan in secrecy and hope in plain sight. Banner, the horse who had been bought for pennies and whose courage had proved no coin could measure, found a stall where the roof would not leak and a paddock where grass rose sweet. He held his head for Rowan's hand each dawn, and sometimes, when in quiet hours, would press his forehead to Rowan's palm as if to place trust there. In the long evenings, when the river whispered and the town's shadows lengthened, Rowan would sit and listen to the soft breathing of animal and child, and feel the stitching of his life mend. The town would speak of the bargain that had been made and unmade, of a horse sold for pennies who chose to be a bridge, of a letter that hid more than ink, of a man who spent small coin on a life and gained a world. They would tell how courage can be measured in a hoof's strike, and how true names may be returned with gentleness. The final turn of the story came not in a crown, but in a simple act, the horse leading Ash to a small knoll, At dusk, where the two of them watched the sun meet the earth, and the town's lights like a handful of coins scattered and warm, Banner stood between boy and world, not as an instrument but as companion. He lifted his head and breathed out, a long, slow breath that tasted of grass and rain. And in that sound Rowan heard the last stitch of his old sorrow draw closed. Aurelia's last note, read aloud once by Ammius on a night of mild wind, ended with a line that all who listened would carry: "Keep him not as trophy, but as kin. Let him choose his road and teach others to follow." It had been the will's seed and the letter's grace. Rowan thought of his small house by the lane, of the cat that trusted no one but him, and of the mornings that would now smell of children's laughter and the steady chew of an old horse. On the final evening, as the sun sloped gold across the fields, the horse did a small, singular thing. He stepped forward and with a gentle brush nudged Rowan's shoulder. He then turned and walked a few paces to the low wall that marked the town's edge and looked back once, a steady, simple look that held both farewell and promise, and then laid his head upon the boy's shoulder as if to say, "The road is ours, and also yours." In that gesture the whole tale found its crown, not in papers or purses, but in the quiet allegiance of living things who choose one another. And there, as the last light died and the town took up its night hum, Rowan whispered what he had not said for years. "We have mended more than leather, friend. We have mended a life." The horse's breath answered like a bell, steady and deep. The world, for one more night, felt right. "Thus ends the knot," Ammius said softly, standing near the gate, "and thus begins the keeping." The words drifted and settled like hay in a manger. One haunting line remained, spoken half to the wind, half to whatever memory keeps the names of those who chose well. "He that was priced for pennies became the measure of a man's mercy, and mercy weighs more than gold. If thy soul was stirred, subscribe and ring yon bell, that thou mayest join us anon for tales untold."